We're going to dive into a story that, well, it actually begins at the very end. We're in the spring of 1945, and we meet a young boy named Helmuth. So picture this. Helmuth is lying in bed, and he overhears his parents. His father, a pretty high-up Nazi doctor, is just filled with this awful fear. He's telling his wife, the Allies, they're going to do to us what we did to the Jews, and, well, to others we considered crippled.
And then the very next day, they have one last happy family picnic. And right after that, Helmut's father goes into his office and shoots himself. I mean, this one act was so traumatic for this little boy. He became so utterly terrified that his own mother might poison him that for the next 9 years, he refused to eat anything at home.
So, that's the big question, right? Why? Why was Helmut's father, a respected Nazi, a doctor, so terrified that he chose to end his own life? To figure that out, we have to hit rewind. We've got to go back and see just how a modern, sophisticated country could spiral into such darkness. Okay, so our story really kicks off right at the end of World War I. It's 1918, Germany has just been defeated, and it's a huge shock. The emperor actually flees the country, and in the chaos, a brand new democratic government pops up. We know it today as the Weimar Republic.
But here's the thing. This new republic was basically born under the worst possible circumstances. Right out of the gate, it's forced to sign this incredibly harsh and humiliating peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles. And a lot of Germans, well, they never, ever forgave their new democratic leaders for doing it.
And this treaty, it was just brutal. I mean, look at this. Germany lost land, it lost resources, its army was gutted, and on top of all that, it was hit with crippling financial payments called reparations. But you know the part that really stung? It was the war guilt clause. They were forced to take 100% of the blame for the entire war. That created this deep sense of national shame that just sat there and festered.
So here's the really important takeaway. From day one, Germany's new democracy was linked to this feeling of disgrace and betrayal. And you had right-wing groups who jumped all over this. They created this powerful, dangerous myth that the German army hadn't really lost, but had been stabbed in the back by its own politicians. They called these leaders the November criminals, and it just poisoned the whole political atmosphere right from the start. So you've got all this political anger boiling over, and then things get so much worse. Germany is about to get slammed by an economic crisis so bad, it's going to tear the country apart. So how do you pay these massive war debts when you have no money? Well, the government tried a really desperate idea. They just started printing more money. And more. And more. And what happens when you do that? You get something called hyperinflation. It's when your money becomes so common that it's basically worthless.
Yeah, this quote really says it all, doesn't it? It sounds insane, but people were literally taking wheelbarrows full of cash to the store just to buy a loaf of bread. Just try to imagine that for a second. Your entire life savings, everything you've ever worked for, suddenly can't even buy you dinner. The whole economic system just evaporated.
Okay, so for a little while, things actually started to get better thanks to some loans from the US. But then, boom, disaster strikes again. The 1929 Wall Street crash happens in America, and it kicks off the Great Depression. Those American loans, they dried up overnight. The German economy completely imploded, and look at these unemployment numbers. They just skyrocketed. We're talking going from about 1 million to 6 million people out of work in just 4 years.
The level of desperation was just off the charts. You'd see people on the street wearing signs around their necks that just said, "Willing to do any work." People had lost it all, their jobs, their life savings, and you know what they lost most of all? Any shred of hope that their democratic government could fix things.
And into this perfect storm of chaos, anger, and total despair steps one man, Adolf Hitler. He was an incredible public speaker, totally mesmerizing, and he had a very simple message. I can fix this. I can make Germany great again.
Now, it's really important to remember this. Before the Great Depression hit, the Nazi Party was, well, they were nothing. A fringe group, kind of seen as a joke. I mean, look at the 1928 election. They got less than 3% of the vote. Nobody was taking them seriously. But now, fast forward just 4 years to 1932. 4 years of economic misery. And what happened? The Nazis went from being a joke to being the single biggest political party in the entire country. The despair was the fuel for their rise to power.
So what was his secret? He made simple, powerful promises that everyone wanted to hear. He said, "I'll rebuild our nation. I'll get you jobs, we'll get our dignity back, and we'll tear up that humiliating treaty. And he put on this incredible spectacle, massive rallies, all the red banners with swastikas, these dramatic rituals. It all created this powerful feeling of belonging and strength. To a nation on its knees, he looked like a savior.
And so, on January 30th, 1933, it happens. The president, Hindenburg, makes Hitler the Chancellor. And this is key. He came to power legally, through the political system. But the second he had that power, he began to tear down democracy with frightening speed.
It happened so fast. Just a month after he becomes chancellor, there's this mysterious fire at the Reichstag, the parliament building. Hitler pounces on it. It's the perfect excuse. He immediately passes something called the Fire Decree. Poof, there go your civil rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all gone. Then, just a little while later, he passes the Enabling Act. And that was the kill shot. It gave him total dictatorial power. Just like that, German democracy was over.
So, what did these guys actually believe? Well, at the absolute heart of Nazi ideology was this really twisted, hateful idea about race. They created this hierarchy. At the very top, you had what they called the Nordic German Aryans, the master race, they said. And at the absolute bottom, the Jews. They weren't just seen as less than, they were seen as an anti-race, an enemy that had to be completely wiped out for Germany to survive.
And this is so revealing about how they controlled every part of life. Hitler says the mother is the most important citizen. Sounds nice, right? But what he meant was that a woman's only value was to produce what they called racially desirable children. If you did, you got awards. But if you were an Aryan woman who had a relationship with someone Jewish, you'd be dragged into the street, your head would be shaved, your face blackened, and you'd be publicly humiliated. It was about total control.
And all of this hate, this twisted ideology, it was all leading to one place. A horrifying logical conclusion. The systematic industrial-scale murder of 6 million Jewish people and millions of others. The crime that we now know as the Holocaust.
And it's so important to understand, this wasn't just a random burst of violence. It was a planned, organized, bureaucratic process, a machine of death. It happened in stages. First, they used laws to exclude Jewish people, to take away their citizenship, their jobs, their property. Then they herded them into these awful, starving ghettos. And finally came the final solution, packing people onto trains and sending them to purpose-built death camps, where millions were murdered in gas chambers.
And that brings us all the way back to the beginning. Back to Helmuth and his father. Why did he do it? It wasn't because he was sorry for what he'd done. It was pure, selfish fear. Germany had lost the war. The Allies were coming. And he knew he was going to have to face justice for the part he played in all of this horror.
After the war ended, the surviving Nazi leaders were put on trial at Nuremberg, and these trials established something new, something incredibly important for the world. Saying, "I was just following orders," is not a defense for committing crimes against humanity. You know, the story of the Third Reich it's a terrifying lesson. It shows us just how fragile democracy can be, and how powerful and dangerous propaganda is. And it leaves us all with that one crucial question. What happens when good people choose to stay silent?